Welcome to this explainer. Today, we are embarking on a truly fascinating journey, really a documentary-style deep dive into one of the most historically layered and frankly, most significant locations on the entire planet. We're talking about the Al-Aqsa Mosque compound. We're going to completely strip away the noise and look directly at the sources. We'll be digging into ancient texts, archaeological records, and even modern administrative documents to really grasp the multi-layered significance of this incredible site. Whether you're a theology buff, a medieval history nerd, or just curious about modern geopolitics, there is a massively rich story here just waiting to be unpacked.
Okay, let's dive into this. When you hear the name Al-Aqsa Mosque, you probably picture a single building, right? But in reality, we're talking about an immense, almost unbelievable scale. 144,000 square meters. To put that into perspective, that is 14 hectares of space, literally anchored right in the southeast corner of the old city of Jerusalem. This entire vast area, which is also known as Al-Haram al-Sharif, or the Noble Sanctuary, is basically a complex of multiple mosques, prayer rooms, courtyards, 32 different water sources, and historic schools. Establishing this massive physical footprint right off the bat is absolutely crucial if we want to grasp the sheer historical and geopolitical weight this site carries.
So to make sense of this incredibly complex site, we're going to break it down into three main pillars. Number one, spiritual roots. Number two, architectural history. And number three, modern administration. Let's kick things off with part one, spiritual roots, the first Qibla and the night journey. The spiritual anchor of Al-Aqsa in Islam revolves around an event known as the Isra and Miraj. According to Islamic belief, this was a miraculous night journey. During the first part, the Isra, the Prophet Muhammad traveled all the way from Mecca to Al-Aqsa. And there, he led all the prophets who preceded him in prayer. Then came the Miraj, which was his ascension to the heavens from that very spot. And you know, this isn't just a fascinating historical story. It's the exact defining moment in Islamic theology where the divine commandment for Muslims to perform their daily prayers was established. Actually, fun fact, it was reduced from an initial command of 50 prayers all the way down to 5, after some pretty pivotal advice from the prophet Moses. So the crucial point here is that Al-Aqsa's significance wasn't just a fleeting moment in time. It actually served as Islam's very first Qibla, meaning the direction that Muslims face during prayer. In fact, if we look at the timeline really carefully, the Prophet Muhammad prayed towards Al-Aqsa for over 14 years. Think about that. That covers 13 years while he was living in Mecca, and then roughly 16 to 17 months after he migrated to Medina, long before the direction was ever changed to the Kaaba in Mecca. He actually spent a longer period of his life praying towards Jerusalem than he did praying towards Mecca.
Now, what's really interesting is that when we look at documentary research into classical texts, it absolutely proves this enduring spiritual bond. Scholars studying early foundational texts, like the works of Al-Tabari, Al-Bukhari, and Ibn Hisham, reveal that praying towards Baitul Maqdis, or Jerusalem, was this deliberate daily practice. It deeply embedded the site into the Muslim consciousness right from the very beginning of the Prophet's mission. It totally wasn't an afterthought. It was a foundational, living connection to the Abrahamic lineage.
All right, let's transition over to part two, architectural history, from the Umayyads to the present. The physical structures we see today, they're the result of centuries of construction, destruction, occupation, and some incredibly meticulous restoration. This timeline maps out three defining eras for us. We've got the foundational Umayyad construction back in the early 8th century, followed by the dramatic 88-year Crusader occupation starting in 1099, and finally the famous liberation and restoration by Salah ad-Din in 1187. Each of these eras left a very real, permanent mark on the stones of Al-Aqsa.
When we talk about the initial construction of the Grand Congregational Mosque, the historical evidence is astoundingly precise. We aren't just relying on spoken tradition here. Medieval Arabic chronicles explicitly state the mosque reached substantial completion between 706 and 708 CE under the Umayyad Caliph al-Walid I. But what is truly amazing, and I love this detail, is that this is perfectly corroborated by the Aphrodite papyri. These are official Greek administrative documents found all the way in Egypt, literally detailing the logistical dispatch of workers to Jerusalem for this exact project. Add in the physical field archaeology that identifies the Aqsa second phase of Umayyad stone construction, and you have this flawless, ironclad historical consensus.
But, the compound hasn't always been under Islamic administration. In 1099, the Crusaders occupied Jerusalem, and for 88 years, they radically transformed the site. Muslims were strictly forbidden to pray there. The breathtaking Dome of the Rock was completely covered in Christian iconography, crowned with a massive golden cross, and renamed the Holy of Holies. Meanwhile, the Crusader King Baldwin actually took up residence right inside the Al-Qabli Mosque, which was later handed over to the Knights Templar to serve as their main headquarters. They even took the southeastern area, known as Al-Musalla al-Marwani, pierced its ancient columns, and used it to tie up their horses. That space subsequently became known in history as Solomon's Stables.
And this next bit brilliantly illustrates the long-term historical yearning to reclaim the site. Nearly 2 entire decades before Salah al-Din, who you might know as Saladin, actually recaptured Jerusalem in 1187, his predecessor, Nur al-Din, commissioned this magnificent wooden pulpit, or minbar, in Aleppo, Syria. He had it built with the absolute, unwavering conviction that it would one day sit inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Talk about confidence, right? And in 1187, Salah al-Din actually fulfilled that vision. He removed the Crusader modifications and installed that very minbar, where it stood as an absolute masterpiece of Islamic art right up until modern times.
Which brings us to our final pillar, Part 3, Modern Administration, the Waqf and the Status Quo.
So how is this massive 144,000 square meter compound actually managed today? Well, the answer lies in something called the status quo and the Jordanian Islamic Waqf Department. You see, since 1924, the Hashemite Kingdom of Jordan has held the role of custodian of both the Islamic and Christian holy sites in Jerusalem. The Waqf is this massive civilian administrative body that employs nearly 1,000 staff members based right there in the Old City. And their duties are immense. They register endowments, which, by the way, historically made up 66% of the Old City's entire area. They regulate internal access, they maintain historical archives, and they supervise the schools on the property. They are, quite literally, the daily caretakers of this shared global heritage. However, the modern reality on the ground is highly complex and it's heavily divided. While the Waqf Department expertly manages the compound and its internal administration, they do not control the perimeter. Of the traditional 15 gates leading into the noble sanctuary, only 10 remain open today. And access through these 10 gates is entirely controlled by heavily armed Israeli soldiers and police. This means that while Jewish Israelis and foreign tourists can enter through specific gates, Palestinian access can be strictly limited or sometimes barred entirely, depending on the security environment. And as you might guess, this leads to frequent and severe tensions, especially during major religious holidays like Ramadan.
Which leaves us with a really profound lingering thought. We've seen how faith established the site's deep reverence, how its stones carry the visible scars of centuries of conquest and restoration, and how a very fragile administrative status quo attempts to hold it all together today. When you look at these incredibly overlapping layers of history, theology, and modern geopolitics, you just have to ask yourself, how does the delicate historical status quo of the Waqf shape the future of this shared heritage site? Will it hold steady, or will history's pendulum swing once again? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I will catch you on the next one.